Hi, my name is Lisa, and I'm 27. My wedding day was supposed to be the happiest day of my life. I had spent months planning every little detail, the flowers, the venue, the dress that made me feel like a princess. My fiancé, Jake, and I had dreamed of this moment together. It wasn't just about the ceremony, it was about celebrating our love with the people closest to us. But my sister Rachel had other plans. Rachel is 29, and if there's one thing you need to know about her, it's that she always needs to be the center of attention. Growing up, it was like I was living in her shadow. If I got a new dress, she suddenly needed one twice as expensive. If I got a promotion at work, she would immediately remind everyone of her even bigger career milestone. I was used to it. I had accepted that Rachel would always be Rachel. But what she did at my wedding, that was a new low. Everything was perfect, at first. The ceremony was beautiful. The reception was filled with laughter and love. Jake and I were glowing, surrounded by friends and family. As the night continued, it was time for our first dance. The lights dimmed, and the soft melody of our favorite song filled the room. I felt like I was in a fairy tale, wrapped in Jake's arms, lost in the moment. Then Rachel grabbed the mic. At first, I thought she was going to give a heartfelt speech. I had asked her to say a few words, hoping that for once in her life, she could just be happy for me. But instead, she took a deep breath, flashed a dramatic smile, and said, "Since we're all gathered here today, I have some incredible news to share. I'm engaged." A wave of gasps filled the room. I froze. My mother squealed in excitement. My father immediately stood up to hug her. People started clapping, congratulating her. Rachel stretched out her hand, showing off a sparkling diamond ring. I watched in horror as the crowd swarmed her, completely forgetting about me, about Jake, about my wedding. Jake squeezed my hand under the table, his jaw clenched. "Are you kidding me?" he muttered under his breath. I felt a knot in my stomach as I forced a smile, trying to act like it didn't bother me. But it did. Rachel had hijacked my wedding. She had turned my special day into her engagement party. I sat there, my fists clenched under the table, watching as Rachel basked in the spotlight. My own mother was crying tears of joy, not for me, not for my marriage, but for Rachel's engagement. But what she didn't know? I had a secret. A dark, dirty secret she thought she had buried forever. And as I sat there, watching her steal my moment, I made a decision. She took my wedding. I was about to take everything from her. Rachel and I had never been close. Not really. Growing up, she was the golden child, the one my parents doted on, praised, and made endless excuses for. If she wanted something, she got it. If she messed up, someone else was always to blame. And me? I was just there. It started small. If I got a new dress, she'd suddenly need a new, more expensive one. If I got a compliment, she'd find a way to redirect the attention to herself. My birthdays? She always managed to have some huge life event right before them. An injury, a sudden heartbreak, or some drama that required my parents to focus all their energy on her instead. But the worst part? I let it slide. I let her take the spotlight over and over again, because what was the point in fighting? My parents would always take her side. So I learned to pick my battles. Until my wedding. My wedding was supposed to be mine. The one day where I didn't have to compete with Rachel for attention. The one day where I could be the center of love, excitement, and celebration. I deserved that, right? Apparently not. When I first got engaged to Jake, Rachel's reaction was underwhelming. No excitement, no happy squeal, just a distracted, "Oh, cool, congrats," before she went back to scrolling on her phone. My mom, on the other hand, had plenty to say, but not about me. "Lisa, you have to make Rachel your maid of honor," she told me that night. I hesitated. My best friend, Sarah, had been there for me through everything. She had stayed up late helping me plan, comforted me when I felt overwhelmed, and knew exactly what I wanted. Rachel, on the other hand, she had barely asked me anything about my wedding. I was thinking of asking Sarah, I admitted. My mother gasped like I had just slapped her. "Lisa, you can't do that. Rachel would be devastated. She's your sister. I bit my tongue. Was she my sister, or just my lifelong competition? But my mother wouldn't let it go. Lisa, don't you care about Rachel's feelings? Ah, there it was. The same old guilt trip. I should have said no. I should have fought harder. But once again, I gave in. Fine, I muttered. And that's when everything started falling apart. At first, Rachel pretended to care. She smiled, nodded, and acted just interested enough for my mother's sake. But then, she turned into a bridezilla for my wedding. She changed my bachelorette party plans because she thought they were boring. She mocked my dress, saying it was too plain and that she would have picked something more elegant. She criticized my venue, claiming it was nice, but not luxurious enough. And then, she showed up to my bridal fitting in a white dress. Yes, a white dress. I just wanted to see how I'd look in one, she said with an innocent shrug. That night, Sarah pulled me aside. Lisa, wake up. She's going to do something. You know that, right? I forced a laugh. It's fine. She's just being Rachel. Sarah narrowed her eyes. She's being calculating. She's not just trying to steal your thunder. She's trying to ruin your wedding. I wanted to believe she was wrong. I wanted to believe for once that Rachel would let me have my moment. I was so wrong. The wedding day arrived. Everything was perfect at first. The ceremony was beautiful. The vows were heartfelt. The reception was magical. Jake and I shared our first dance, and for once, it felt like the world revolved around us. And then Rachel grabbed the mic. I should have known. I should have stopped her the moment I saw that glint in her eye. But I didn't. I thought she was going to give a speech. After all, she was my maid of honor. Maybe, just maybe, she would actually be happy for me. Instead, she smiled at the crowd, took a deep breath, and said, "Since we're all gathered here today, I have some incredible news to share. I'm engaged." The room erupted. Gasps, cheers, applause. I felt like the air had been sucked out of my lungs. My mother screamed in excitement, rushing to hug her. My father stood up, beaming. People swarmed her, clapping and congratulating her. My wedding reception had just turned into Rachel's engagement party. Jake squeezed my hand under the table, his jaw clenched. "Are you freaking kidding me?" he muttered under his breath. I just stared, my entire body numb. This was it. This was my breaking point. Rachel had hijacked my birthday parties, my graduation, my entire childhood. And now she had taken over my wedding. But she had no idea what was coming, because I knew something big, something she thought she had buried forever. And as I sat there, watching her steal my moment yet again, I made a decision. She took my wedding. I was about to take everything from her. After Rachel's stunt at the wedding, I knew I couldn't let her get away with it. But I had to be smart. I had to plan this carefully. I wasn't going to make the same mistake again by confronting her head-on or giving her a piece of my mind in the heat of the moment. I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of seeing me flustered or emotional. Instead, I was going to use everything she had done to me, everything she thought she had buried, to completely crush her. I started by gathering information, starting with the most basic thing I knew about her, her insecurities. Rachel was always obsessed with her image, constantly comparing herself to others and needing validation. As much as she liked to pretend that everything was perfect, there was always something she feared more than anything: exposure. I had known for years that she had this secret life, something she desperately tried to keep hidden from everyone. It wasn't a bad secret. It was something more personal, something that would make people look at her differently. It was about her past, about a relationship she had been in before she met her fiancé, Brandon. She had been seeing someone who was a lot older than her, a man who had already been married, with kids, and a whole life that didn't include her. I remember her crying to me once, telling me how ashamed she was of that part of her life. But after she broke things off with him, she made it clear that it was behind her. She deleted all his texts, blocked him on social media, and even lied to her friends about the whole thing, pretending like she'd never been involved with him. But I knew the truth. And as I sat there, watching her gloat about her engagement at my wedding, I realized that this was the moment. This was the moment I could take everything she had carefully built for herself and expose it. I knew it wasn't going to be easy. I couldn't just walk up to her and spill her secret. No, that would be too obvious, too messy. I had to be strategic, subtle. I needed to make sure she didn't see it coming. So, I started doing some digging. I had kept a few old pictures of her from when she was with this man, photos she had tried to delete from the family albums, but some of them had slipped through the cracks. I also knew there were messages on her old phone, the ones she had been so desperate to get rid of. There were a few mutual friends who had seen them together, and I knew that with the right approach, I could get them to talk. But I wasn't going to act right away. I bided my time, watching her every move. I saw how she started flaunting her perfect life with Brandon, posting all those adorable pictures of them on Instagram, acting like the happy couple. I knew exactly what she was trying to do. She was trying to show the world that she had it all. But she was missing one thing: me. I had decided that I wasn't just going to expose her secret in a random, messy way. I needed to make sure it happened at the perfect moment. I wanted to control the narrative. I wanted her to feel the humiliation she had put me through, at my wedding no less. She had taken my spotlight, and now I was going to make sure the world saw who she really was. And then it hit me, the perfect opportunity: Rachel's engagement party. I knew she was planning one for all of our extended family and friends. After all, she needed another event to show off her engagement ring and her happy relationship. This would be the perfect setting to let everyone know about her secret. It was a public event, one that would shatter her carefully cultivated image in front of everyone she wanted to impress. I had a plan. I started with a simple conversation. One afternoon, when we were both at a family gathering, I casually mentioned to Rachel that I had found a few old pictures of her and her ex. I made sure to do it in front of a few of our cousins, people who still looked up to her, who still thought she was the golden girl. "Oh, Rachel," I said with a smirk, "I found some pictures of you and what's his name from that trip to Miami. You know, the one with the older guy. He was cute, right?" I could see the color drain from her face as she froze, looking around at the family members who had started to pay attention. "What? What are you talking about?" she stammered, clearly trying to cover her tracks. I leaned in, lowering my voice so only she could hear. "You know, the guy who was married with kids. You told me you didn't want anyone to know about him, but maybe I'll show everyone at your engagement party, just to remind them of your perfect past." Her eyes widened, and she started to stammer again, but I could see the panic building behind her eyes. "You wouldn't—" I smiled and walked away, leaving her standing there, alone and panicking. I knew I had planted the seed. The next few days were tense. I kept playing it cool, acting like nothing had changed. But every time I saw her, I could see the fear in her eyes. She was nervous. She knew I had the power to ruin everything, and I could see that she was doing everything she could to avoid me. But I wasn't finished yet. I had the pictures, I had the messages, and soon I would have the perfect moment to expose her for good. The day of Rachel's engagement party finally arrived. I had waited for this moment for weeks, savoring the buildup. Rachel had been posting about it nonstop on social media, and the invitations were everywhere. Everyone she knew would be there: family, friends, acquaintances, everyone who thought Rachel was the perfect, untouchable golden girl. I could already picture the look on her face when everything went completely wrong. I had planned it all to the letter. I knew Rachel would be nervous about me attending, but she couldn't avoid me now. This was the perfect opportunity to make sure her secret came to light. I arrived at the party looking calm, confident, and composed. Rachel was all smiles as she welcomed guests, flashing her engagement ring and basking in the attention. She looked flawless, of course. Everything about her was always so perfectly curated. Her hair, her dress, the way she spoke, everything screamed, "Look at me, I have it all." But beneath all that, I knew the truth. And today, everyone else was going to know it too. I spent the first part of the evening mingling with family and friends, chatting casually, making small talk. I made sure to stay close to Rachel, acting like nothing was wrong. It wasn't time yet. I wanted her to feel comfortable, to think everything was fine. She had no idea that I was about to bring her entire world crashing down. As the evening progressed, I could see Rachel growing more relaxed, more confident. Her fiancé, Brandon, was by her side, and they were posing for pictures, laughing, soaking up the compliments. But it was all an act. It was all just smoke and mirrors. Then came the moment I had been waiting for. The crowd gathered around the center of the room for Rachel's toast. The lights dimmed slightly, and she took the microphone, standing next to Brandon, glowing with happiness. I stood at the back of the room, watching with a quiet sense of satisfaction. Rachel started her speech, thanking everyone for coming, thanking her parents, her friends, and of course, Brandon. She was clearly in her element, enjoying every second of the spotlight. But then, just as she was wrapping up, I couldn't resist anymore. I stood up slowly and walked toward the stage. The room went silent, eyes on me. Rachel's smile faltered for a moment, but she quickly recovered, thinking I was just coming over to congratulate her. I smiled at her and then turned to the crowd. "Before we continue," I said, my voice loud and clear, "I'd like to share something with all of you." The room was suddenly still. Rachel's eyes widened. She didn't know what was coming. I took a deep breath, acting calm, but inside, my heart was pounding. This was it, the moment I had planned. I was just reminded of something from Rachel's past that I think everyone here should know, I began. I glanced at her, and the look of panic on her face was impossible to ignore. Rachel opened her mouth to protest, but I raised a hand, signaling for silence. "See, what Rachel doesn't realize," I continued, "is that not everything about her life is as perfect as she pretends. Some things don't just disappear, no matter how hard you try to cover them up." I paused, letting the tension build. And some secrets have a way of coming to light, especially when they're too big to stay hidden. Rachel's face turned pale, and her hand started to shake as she clutched the microphone. "What are you talking about?" she stammered, her voice cracking. "I'm talking about the man you were with before Brandon," I said, letting the words hang in the air. The room gasped. Rachel tried to move toward me, but I stepped back, keeping my distance. "You know, the one who was married and had kids? The one you were so desperate to keep a secret?" I asked, my voice dripping with calm satisfaction. Rachel's eyes filled with tears as she looked at the crowd, clearly realizing that everything she'd worked so hard to hide was now exposed. Her worst fear was playing out right in front of her. I wasn't done yet. "I've got pictures," I said, pulling my phone from my bag. "I've got texts, messages, everything you thought you erased, and today, I'm showing everyone." With that, I pulled up the photo I'd found from years ago, the one of Rachel with that man, smiling on a beach in Miami. She had been so young, so caught up in a relationship that she was ashamed of. I didn't show the photo immediately, letting the suspense grow. Rachel's face was a mix of shock and anger, but there was no escape now. I tapped the screen, and the image flashed on the projector behind me. A collective gasp echoed through the room. Rachel's world was crumbling, and I watched it happen in real time. "Rachel," I said, my voice softer now but still firm, "I think everyone deserves to know who you really are, not just the perfect version you've been selling." Her hands were trembling, and she was now visibly crying. "Please," she begged, her voice barely audible. "Please don't do this." But it was too late. The damage had already been done. Her engagement party, once filled with laughter and joy, was now silent, the atmosphere tense with the weight of the revelation. Friends were whispering, family members were exchanging shocked glances, and Rachel's fiancé, Brandon, stood there, staring at her, completely stunned. As Rachel tried to regain control, I stepped back, letting her unravel in front of the crowd. She had stolen my moment at my wedding, and now I had taken everything from her. The room was dead quiet as I turned to leave, knowing I had done exactly what I had planned. I didn't need to say another word. Rachel's perfect image was shattered, and there was no coming back from that. The days following the engagement party felt like a blur. My phone was blowing up with messages, some congratulating me, others expressing shock over what had happened. I wasn't surprised by the messages of support. People were sick of Rachel's act. They had just never said it out loud. But as for Rachel, she was a different story. I didn't hear from her at all the next day. She didn't text, didn't call. I half expected her to show up at my door, screaming, begging for me to undo what I had done. But she didn't. In fact, it was radio silence, complete and utter silence. I had expected a confrontation, but instead, I was met with a cold, empty void. It was a few days later that I received a text from my mother. It was simple. "We need to talk. Your sister is devastated." I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. Rachel had hurt me for years, and I had given her so many chances to stop. I had tried to be the bigger person, to swallow my pride and support her, but all she did was take. Now, the world knew what I knew. She was no longer the flawless golden girl. I went about my life, enjoying the freedom of finally being able to breathe without Rachel constantly looming over me. Jake and I spent more time together, strengthening our relationship after everything that had happened. For the first time in a long while, I felt at peace. Then, about a week after the engagement party, Rachel came over to my apartment. I knew it was coming, but I still wasn't prepared for the state she was in. When she knocked on my door, I opened it to find her standing there, looking like a ghost of the woman who had walked in and stolen my spotlight just days before. Her eyes were red, and her face was pale. She looked like she hadn't slept, hadn't eaten, like she had been broken. "I need to talk," she whispered, barely making eye contact. I let her in. She didn't waste any time. I'm sorry," she said, her voice trembling. "I've been selfish. I've hurt you so many times, and I was just too blind to see it. I'm sorry for what I did to you at your wedding, and for everything I've done to make you feel less than. I never meant to ruin your life." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. This wasn't the Rachel I knew. The Rachel I knew never apologized. She never admitted when she was wrong. It was always about her, always about making everyone else feel inferior so she could feel better about herself. I crossed my arms, leaning back against the couch. "Do you really think saying sorry is enough after everything you've done?" She looked up at me, her eyes full of regret. "I don't know, but I realize now that you were never the problem. I was. I've always been the one who needed to make everything about me, and I'm sorry for dragging you into that. I'm sorry for everything." I stayed silent, just watching her. I wanted to feel sympathy. I wanted to feel like the sister I once cared about was still in there somewhere. But deep down, I knew something had shifted. She wasn't the person I thought she was. The Rachel I once loved had been consumed by jealousy, competition, and pride, and I couldn't just forgive her for everything she had put me through. "I know what you did to me at my wedding was unforgivable," I said, my voice flat. "But what you didn't realize was that you didn't just hurt me. You hurt yourself." Rachel looked at me, her eyes searching for some kind of understanding. "What do you mean?" "You wanted to be perfect. You wanted everyone to think you were this flawless, untouchable person. But all it did was make everyone around you feel like they were nothing. I wasn't the only one you hurt. You've been hurting everyone who's ever tried to get close to you, Rachel. And now they know the truth." She hung her head. "I know, and I don't know how to fix it." "You don't. You can't," I said. "It's too late for apologies. The damage has already been done." She sat down across from me, a long pause hanging between us. It wasn't the reunion I had imagined. There was no big emotional hug or tearful reconciliation. There was just an overwhelming sense of finality, an understanding that the relationship we once had was gone. Rachel left a little while later, and I never saw her the same way again. We still exchanged family pleasantries when we saw each other at family events, but it was different. She wasn't the same person, and neither was I. As for her relationship with Brandon, it eventually fell apart. I wasn't there to see it unravel, but I heard through the grapevine that their engagement ended not long after the party. Brandon couldn't look at her the same way again, not after her secret came out. She lost more than just her engagement. She lost the trust of the people who had once looked up to her. She lost the image she'd worked so hard to perfect. Me? I moved on. I started focusing on my own happiness, my relationship with Jake, and the life I had always wanted. The difference was, this time, it was my life, on my terms. In the end, I realized something important. I didn't need Rachel's approval, or anyone else's, to feel good about myself. It wasn't about revenge. It was about finally taking control of my own story. And I had done it.